The stairwell erupted in chaos as Tyler Knox's boot connected with Miss Harper's shoulder, sending the new English teacher tumbling down 8 concrete steps. But what happened next made every student filming on their phones drop their jaws in disbelief. In exactly 47 seconds, 3-star athletes would be on their knees, begging for mercy from a woman they dismissed as just another weak substitute. Before we dive into how a quiet literature teacher transformed into something out of a military thriller, hit that subscribe button because this story proves why you should never judge someone by their cardigan and reading glasses. Grace Harper had only been teaching at Westfield High for 3 weeks when the incident that would become school legend occurred. At 32, she carried herself with a peculiar blend of softness and precision that most students attributed to typical teacher nervousness. Her blonde hair was always pulled back in a neat bun, her clothes conservative and unremarkable, long skirts, button-up blouses, sensible flats. She spoke in measured tones during class, never raising her voice, even when Tyler Knox and his crew disrupted her lessons with their usual antics. What nobody knew was that before she'd traded combat boots for teaching credentials, Staff Sergeant Grace Harper had served 3 tours in Afghanistan with the 75th Ranger Regiment. The same hands that now graded poetry essays had once disarmed IEDs under enemy fire. The soft voice that read Shakespeare had once barked orders over the thunder of helicopter rotors, but she'd left all that behind. Seeking peace in educating young minds rather than engaging in warfare, Tyler Knox ruled Westfield High like a small-town dictator. At 18, the wrestling team captain stood 6'3" with the kind of casual cruelty that comes from never facing real consequences. His father owned half the commercial real estate in town, including the building that housed the school board offices. This wasn't just privilege, it was immunity, and Tyler wielded it like a weapon. "Check this out," Tyler muttered to his lieutenants, Jake Brennan and Marcus Cole. As they lingered in the hallway after the lunch bell, Miss Harper was climbing the stairs to her 3rd-floor classroom, arms full of student essays and library books. Time to test the substitute. It had started small, as these things always do. Whispered comments during class, books accidentally knocked off her desk, crude drawings left on the whiteboard. Grace had documented everything, following proper channels, filing reports with Principal Morrison, but Morrison, who owed his job to Tyler's father's influence, had merely suggested she develop thicker skin and try to connect with the students better. On this particular Tuesday afternoon, things escalated beyond mere harassment. Grace was halfway up the stairwell when she heard footsteps behind her. Fast, aggressive, purposeful. Her military instincts screamed danger, but she forced herself to maintain her teacher persona. Maybe they were just late students rushing to class. "Hey, Miss Harper!" Tyler's voice echoed off the concrete walls. "Heard you've been complaining about us to Morrison?" Grace paused, adjusting her grip on the papers. 23 students' essays on the things they carried. Ironically, a war novel she'd chosen for its themes of burden and trauma. "Tyler, you boys should be in class." "Or what?" Jake laughed, moving to block the stairs above her. "You'll write us up? Give us detention?" Marcus flanked her from below. Classic, tactical positioning. Though they probably didn't realize they were using military containment strategies, Grace's mind automatically cataloged exits, distances, potential weapons. The metal handrail, the fire extinguisher mounted on the landing, the heavy textbooks in her arms. "I need to get to class," she said calmly, though her muscles were already shifting, weight transferring to the balls of her feet. "So do you. Here's the thing." Tuller stepped closer, his wrestling shoes squeaking on the polished floor. "My dad pays more in taxes than you make in a year. Hell, more than you'll make in 10 years. So maybe you should learn your place." The security camera in the corner was covered with a black plastic bag. Premeditated, Grace noticed 3 more students at the bottom of the stairs. Phones out. Recording. They wanted this on video. They wanted to humiliate her, to break her, to post it online with some clever caption about putting teachers in their place. "My place," Grace repeated softly, "is in my classroom, teaching. Now please move. Make me." Tula grin, chest puffing out. 220 pounds of entitled muscle versus a 130-pound English teacher. In his mind, this was already over. That's when he made his critical mistake. As Grace tried to step around him, Tyler grabbed her shoulder and shoved. Not a gentle push. A full-force attack meant to send her tumbling. His boot shot out, catching her in the ribs, adding momentum to her fall. Grace Harper fell down 8 concrete steps. But she didn't fall like Tyler expected. Instead of flailing in panic, her body moved with fluid precision. She tucked and rolled, dispersing the impact across her shoulders and back. The papers scattered like snow, but Grace was already flowing back to her feet at the bottom of the stairs. Barely winded, the students filming gasped, their phones shaking as they tried to process what they'd just seen. That, Grace said, straightening her blouse, was assault. Tyler laughed, but it sounded forced now. You fell? Everyone saw it. Clumsy substitute teacher takes a tumble. I see. Grace nodded slowly. So, that's how you want to play this? She began walking back up the stairs. Not quickly. Not aggressively. Just steady. Inévitable progrès. Tyler moved to block her again. But something in her eyes made him hesitate. The nervous teacher was gone. In her place stood someone else entirely. Someone who had faced far worse than teenage bullies. Move, she said. One word. Quiet. But it carried the weight of absolute authority. Or what? Tyler recovered his bravado. You'll cry to Morrison again? Face it. Lady, you're nothing here. Just another... Grace moved. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't telegraphed. One moment she was standing still. The next Tyler was airborne. She'd used his own weight against him. A simple redirection of energy that sent him flying over her shoulder. He hit the landing hard. All the air exploding from his lungs. Jake rushed forward, throwing a wild haymaker. Grace slipped inside his reach. Her elbow, finding his solar plexus with surgical precision. He folded like a broken chair, gasping on the floor. Marcus, the smartest of the three, tried to grab her from behind. Grace dropped her weight, spun, and swept his legs. He went down face first, her knee pressing between his shoulder blades before he could even process what happened. 47 seconds. That's all it took. 3 elite athletes, wrestlers, football players, kids who'd been in fights before, reduced to gasping, groaning heaps. Grace hadn't thrown a single punch. She'd barely broken a sweat. The students with phones stood frozen, their devices capturing something that would reshape the entire social hierarchy of Westfield High. Now then, Grace said, adjusting her hair, which had barely shifted from its neat bun. I believe we were discussing your place versus mine? Tyler tried to rise, but his legs wouldn't cooperate. The throw had been perfect. Maximum impact. Minimum permanent damage. He'd be bruised for weeks, but nothing broken. Grace knew exactly how much force to apply. She'd had years of practice. You can't, he wheezed. Can't what? Grace began collecting her scattered papers. Defend myself when 3 adult-sized men attack me in a stairwell? Actually, Tyler, what I can't do is let you continue terrorizing this school. My dad will, your father will what? Grace cut him off. Sue me for defending myself against a filmed assault? Press charges when you kicked a teacher down the stairs? She gestured to the phone still recording. Please, make my case easier. Jake had managed to prop himself against the wall, tears streaming down his face. Not from pain, from shock, from the complete inversion of everything he thought he knew about power. You're wondering how? Grace said conversationally, still gathering essays. 3 big strong boys versus 1 small teacher. Doesn't seem fair, does it? She paused, meeting each of their eyes in turn. I served 8 years in the Rangers. Afghanistan, Iraq, places where entitled little boys like you wouldn't last 10 minutes. I've been in real fights. Tyler, life and death. This? She gestured dismissively. This was barely a warm-up. Marcus found his voice. Rangers don't. They don't take women. They do now. Grace smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. First female to complete RASP. Ranger Assessment and Selection Program. 8 weeks of hell that would make your wrestling practices look like nap time. Want to know what real training looks like? Tyler's face had gone from red to pale. His entire worldview, where money meant power, where size meant dominance, where teachers were weak and students like him were untouchable, was crumbling. Please, he whispered, The word seemed to surprise him as much as anyone. Tyler Knox didn't say please. Tyler Knox didn't beg. But here he was, on his knees in a high school stairwell, pleading with a woman he'd tried to assault. Please what? Grace asked. Please don't. Don't call the cops. Don't. Oh. Now you're worried about consequences? Grace laughed. But there was no humor in it. Where was that concern when you covered the security camera? When you planned this little ambush? When you kicked me down the stairs? The crowd at the bottom of the stairs had grown, students drawn by the commotion, teachers who'd heard the noise. Principal Morrison himself appeared, his face cycling through confusion, shock, and fear as he took in the scene. Miss Harper, what is the meaning of Principal Morrison? Grace interrupted, her teacher voice back, but underlaid with steel. These 3 students physically assaulted me in this stairwell. They covered the security camera, surrounded me, and kicked me down 8 concrete steps. I defended myself with minimum necessary force. Everything was captured on video by, she counted quickly, 7 student witnesses. Morrison's mouth opened and closed like a fish. He looked at Tyler, still on his knees, and something shifted in his expression. Perhaps it was the realization that the Knox family's protection only extended so far. Perhaps it was understanding that he'd ignored reports of harassment from a combat veteran. Perhaps it was simple self-preservation. I'll call the police immediately, he stammered. No need, Grace said. I already did. They should be here in about 3 minutes. Tyler made a sound, somewhere between a sob and a whimper. His friends weren't much better. The mighty had fallen, and fallen hard. Grace knelt beside Tyler, her voice dropping so only he could hear. You asked about my place? My place is standing between bullies and their victims. My place is teaching entitled children that actions have consequences. My place is showing you that real strength isn't about size or money or who your daddy is. She stood, addressing the growing crowd. I came here to teach English, to share my love of literature, to help young minds grow. But some of you seem to think kindness is weakness. That gentleness is an invitation for abuse. Let me be crystal clear. Her gaze swept the assembled students. I choose to be gentle. I choose to be kind. But I am not weak, and neither are any of the teachers you've been tormenting. The police sirens were audible now, growing closer. Tyler's crew exchanged panicked looks, the reality of their situation finally sinking in. Assault charges, criminal records, college prospects evaporating, all for what? For the thrill of tormenting someone they saw as beneath them? Miss Harper, a small voice spoke from the crowd. Freshman Ashley Chen, who Tyler's crew had been terrorizing all semester. Thank you. Grace smiled at her, a real smile this time. You're welcome, Ashley. But remember, you don't need me to save you. Any of you. You have more strength than you know. Sometimes you just need to see someone else use theirs first. As the police entered the building, Grace realized something had fundamentally shifted, not just for Tyler and his crew, who were about to face the first real consequences of their lives. Not just for the students who'd witnessed a David and Goliath reversal they'd never forget, but for herself. She'd left the military to find peace, to leave violence behind. But maybe that had been naive. Maybe you couldn't leave your skills at the door. Maybe the point wasn't to hide who you were, but to use it wisely, to protect instead of attack, to teach through example rather than just words. The essays on the things they carried were scattered across 2 flights of stairs, some torn, some crumpled. As the police took statements and Tyler was helped to his feet, his legs still shaky from the perfect throw, Grace began collecting them again. Each paper, a story. Each student carrying their own burdens, their own battles. Ma'am? Officer David Chen approached. Notepad out. I need to take your statement. Grace nodded, handing the recovered essays to Ashley to hold. Of course, though I should mention, the entire incident was filmed from multiple angles. I defended myself with minimum necessary force against 3 adult-sized attackers who had premeditated this assault. As evidenced by their covering the security camera, you seem remarkably calm for someone who was just attacked. Chen observed. Grace met his eyes. Officer, I've been in firefights in Kandahar. 3 privileged teenagers playing tough guy doesn't really register on my stress meter. Chen's eyebrows shot up. Military? Rangers. 8 years. Hooah, he replied automatically. Then grinned. My brother's with the 82nd. These kids had no idea what they were walking into. Did they? None whatsoever. Grace agreed, as Tyler was led past in handcuffs. Actual handcuffs, the kind that meant this was real. This was happening. He looked at Grace one more time. The arrogance was gone. The entitlement evaporated. In its place was something that might have been respect. Or at least understanding. "Miss Harper," he said quietly. I'm sorry." Grace studied him for a long moment. "I believe you are, but sorry doesn't erase actions. Tyler, you're about to learn that actions have consequences. Real ones. Use this lesson." The crowd parted as the police escorted the three boys out. Jake was crying openly now. Marcus stared at the floor. Tyler walked with his head high, but Grace could see the tremor in his hands. Their world, where money meant immunity, where strength meant domination, where teachers were targets, had just ended. Principal Morrison approached hesitantly. "Miss Harper, I owe you an apology. When you reported the harassment, I should have." "Yes." Grace cut him off. "You should have. We'll be discussing that later, along with my lawyer. For now, I have a class to teach. After all this, surely you want to go home. Take the rest of the day." "Principal Morrison," Grace said patiently, as if explaining to a slow student. "They tried to break me, to make me run, to prove that bullies win. The absolute worst thing I could do right now is leave. I have 43 students expecting to discuss Tim O'Brien's work this afternoon. They're going to get that lesson." She turned to the crowd of students still filming, still processing what they'd witnessed. "And for those of you recording this, let me add something for your social media posts. What you saw here wasn't about violence. It wasn't about revenge or showing off. It was about standing up. It was about showing bullies that their reign of terror ends when one person says no more and backs it up." "But Miss Harper?" Ashley spoke up, still clutching the rescued essays. "What if we can't do what you did? What if we don't know how to fight?" Grace's expression softened. "Fighting isn't always physical. Ashley, sometimes it's reporting harassment even when administrators don't listen. Sometimes it's recording evidence. Sometimes it's standing with others who are being targeted. Sometimes it's just refusing to be silent." She paused. "But if anyone is interested, I'm considering starting a self-defense club. Basic technique, confidence building, teaching the difference between aggression and protection." A murmur ran through the crowd. Excited, hopeful. The power dynamic of Westfield High was shifting in real time, and everyone could feel it. As students began dispersing, returning to classes or spreading the story through the halls like wildfire, Grace noticed something. The other teachers who had emerged during the confrontation weren't looking at her with fear or judgment. Miss Patricia Williams, who'd taught biology for 20 years, gave her a subtle nod. Mr. James Foster, the band director Tyler's crew had tormented for being soft, stood a little straighter. Change was coming to Westfield High, not through administrative policies or parent-teacher conferences, but through one woman's refusal to be victimized. Through 47 seconds that proved, strength comes in many forms, and the quietest people often carry the biggest sticks. Grace climbed the stairs to her classroom. Students parting respectfully. No more snickers. No more accidental bumps. No more whispered threats. The substitute teacher had just become the most respected educator in the building, and she'd done it without throwing a single punch in anger. Her classroom was exactly as she'd left it. Quotes from literature covering the walls, desks arranged in a discussion circle, the board still bearing this week's essential question: how do we carry our experiences, and how do they shape who we become? As her students filed in quietly, respectfully, some still showing videos to classmates who'd missed the action, Grace wrote a new quote on the board. Tim O'Brien, from the very book they were studying. "A true war story is never moral. It does not instruct, nor encourage virtue, nor suggest models of proper human behavior, nor restrain men from doing the things men have always done. Today," she announced as the bell rang, "we're going to discuss the difference between necessary violence and chosen violence, between strength and brutality, between standing up and tearing down. Please turn to Chapter 7. And just like that, Grace Harper taught, because that's what teachers do. They show up. They persist. They model the behavior they want to see. Even when, especially when, the world tries to knock them down 8 flights of stairs. The video went viral before the final bell rang. Teacher owns bullies in 47 seconds had 3 million views by dinner time. By 10 p.m., it was trending nationally. Ranger teacher. Number school justice. Number consequences coming. News vans started arriving at Westfield High before sunrise, their satellite dishes sprouting like mushrooms in the parking lot. Grace Harper sat in her living room at 5 a.m., coffee cooling in her hands as her phone buzzed incessantly. Interview requests from CNN, Fox, NBC. Her military buddies sending messages ranging from "Hoo-ah, sister," to "took you long enough to show them what's what." Her mother calling repeatedly, worried sick, after seeing the video on Facebook. "Mom? I'm fine," Grace finally answered. "Better than fine. Actually, Gracie, honey, you threw 3 boys around like rag dolls. It's all over the news. They attacked me first." "Mom, and they're not boys, they're 18-year-old men who thought they could assault a teacher without consequences." The doorbell rang. Through the peephole, Grace saw Ashley Chen standing on her porch with what looked like her entire family. She opened the door to find not just the Chens, but a dozen other parents and students, some carrying coffee and pastries. "Miss Harper," Mrs. Chen spoke first, tears in her eyes. "Ashley told us everything. How those boys have been terrorizing students all year. How you're the first person to stand up to them." She pressed a container of homemade dumplings into Grace's hands. "Thank you." One by one, the stories came out. Sarah Mitchell's daughter had changed schools because of Tyler's harassment. James Wilson's son had attempted suicide after Jake's bullying campaign. Maria Garcia had been paying Tyler $20 a week in protection money to keep him from targeting her disabled brother. "We tried going to Morrison, Mr. Wilson said bitterly. He said kids will be kids. Said we were overreacting." "Not anymore," Grace replied. "Things are going to change." By 7 a.m., the school parking lot was a circus. Principal Morrison tried to maintain control, but the situation had spiraled beyond his ability to manage. The superintendent, Dr. Patricia Wells, had driven down from the district office, her face grim as she surveyed the media frenzy. "Miss Harper," she said, pulling Grace aside. "We need to talk." Grace had expected this. "Of course. Should I bring my lawyer?" Wells winced. "That won't be necessary. I've reviewed the footage, the previous harassment reports you filed, and Morrison's inadequate responses. You're not in any trouble. In fact, I'd like to discuss something else entirely." Inside the conference room, away from the cameras and chaos, Wells laid out her proposition. "We need a complete cultural reset at this school. Morrison will be reassigned to administrative duties pending a full investigation. I'd like you to serve on the committee to select his replacement and help design a comprehensive anti-bullying program. I'm just a substitute teacher." Grace pointed out. "About that?" Wells smiled. "Mrs. Davidson, our permanent English teacher, has decided to take early retirement. The position is yours if you want it. Full benefits, tenure track, and a supplemental stipend to run that self-defense program you mentioned." Grace considered this. She'd come here for peace, for a quiet life of literature and learning. Instead, she'd found herself in another type of battlefield. But maybe that was okay. Maybe some fights were worth having. "I accept," she said, "but I have conditions." Meanwhile, Tyler Knox sat in a holding cell at the county jail, his father pacing outside like a caged lion. Richard Knox had built his real estate empire on intimidation and leverage. But none of that worked here. The video was too clear, the evidence too damning, the public attention too intense. "Dad," Tyler said through the bars, his voice small. "I messed up." Richard whirled on him. "Messed up? You assaulted a decorated veteran on camera. Do you have any idea what this is going to cost me? The lawsuits, the damage to our reputation? Is that all you care about?" Tyler asked, something breaking in his voice. "The money? Your reputation?" For perhaps the first time in his life, Tyler Knox saw his father clearly, saw where his own entitlement had come from, saw the poisoned well he'd been drinking from since birth. "Get me out of here," Richard commanded. "We'll get the best lawyers. Make this go away." "No," Tyler said quietly. "What did you say?" "I said no. Dad, I did this. I hurt people. I've been hurting people for years because I thought I could. Because you taught me I could." Tyler gripped the bars. "I want to plead guilty." Richard's face went purple. "Have you lost your mind? Maybe I've found it." The arraignment was set for Monday. Jake and Marcus, released to their parents, were already turning on each other. Jake's family lawyer advised cooperation. Marcus's parents, first-generation immigrants who'd sacrificed everything for their son's education, were devastated. The scholarship offers from wrestling programs evaporated overnight. Back at school, Grace found her classroom transformed. Students had left flowers, cards, even a hand-drawn picture of her as a superhero. But she noticed something else. The energy in the hallways was different, lighter. Students walked with their heads up. The whispered conversations weren't about fear anymore, but possibility. "Miss Harper?" A group of freshman girls approached hesitantly. "Is it true? About the self-defense club? First meeting is Thursday after school." Grace confirmed. "But understand something. This isn't about learning to hurt people. It's about confidence, boundaries, de-escalation. Physical defense is the last resort, not the first." By Thursday, she expected maybe 20 students. Over 200 showed up. They spilled out of the gym into the hallways. Students, teachers, even some parents. Grace stood before them, no longer the quiet substitute, but not quite comfortable with her sudden celebrity. "We'll need to split into smaller groups," she began, "and I'll need assistant instructors. I'll help." Miss Williams volunteered. "I have a black belt in Taekwondo. I taught women's self-defense at the Y," added Mr. Foster. One by one, hidden strengths emerged. The quiet art teacher who'd boxed in college, the cafeteria worker who'd grown up in rough neighborhoods and learned to protect herself, the janitor who'd served in the Marines. Westfield High's staff had always been stronger than anyone knew. They'd just never had permission to show it. Over the following weeks, the transformation was remarkable. The self-defense club became about more than physical techniques. It was group therapy, community building, empowerment workshop, all in one. Grace taught them the basics: how to break a grip, create distance, use an attacker's momentum against them. But more importantly, she taught them to walk with confidence, to trust their instincts, to support each other. Tyler's guilty plea shocked everyone. Against his father's furious protests and his lawyer's advice, he stood before Judge Catherine Martinez and took responsibility. The video played in court, Tyler flinching as he watched himself kick Grace down the stairs. "Mr. Knox," Judge Martinez said sternly, "you could have killed Miss Harper. That you didn't is pure luck and her exceptional training. I'm sentencing you to 18 months in county jail, 3 years probation, 500 hours of community service, and mandatory anger management therapy." "Your Honor," Tyler spoke up, "could part of my community service be speaking at schools? About bullying? About what I did and why it was wrong?" The judge studied him carefully. "That would be up to the probation department." And Miss Harper's approval. Grace stood. "I approve. Your Honor, people can change. Tyler's young enough to learn from this, to become better. That's what education is about. Growth." Richard Knox stormed out of the courtroom. He would later quietly sell his properties and leave town, his empire crumbling without the fear that had sustained it. Tyler would serve his time, earn his GED in jail, and emerge genuinely changed, but that was still to come. Jake Brennan got 6 months and probation. His wrestling career was over, but he found unexpected purpose working with special needs kids at the community center. Marcus Cole received probation and community service. His parents made him volunteer at a domestic violence shelter, where he came face to face with the real consequences of violence. Principal Morrison's reassignment became permanent. The new principal, Dr. James Chen, no relation to Ashley, was a former Army officer who understood both discipline and compassion. He instituted zero-tolerance policies for bullying but coupled them with restorative justice programs. Detention became less about punishment and more about understanding. Grace's English classes evolved too. Literature became a lens for examining power, violence, justice, and redemption. When they read To Kill a Mockingbird, students discussed not just racism but all forms of systematic oppression. Lord of the Flies sparked debates about what happens when strength becomes brutality. The Outsiders led to conversations about tribal mentality and breaking cycles. 6 months later, Grace stood before a packed auditorium. The self-defense program had become a model for the state, with educators visiting from across the country to observe. She'd been invited to speak at conferences, to train other teachers, to write a book about her experience. She'd turned most of it down. Her place was here, in the classroom, with her students. People ask me if I regret what happened, she told the audience, if I wish I'd handled it differently. The truth is, I regret that it took violence to create change. I regret that Tyler and his friends had to face jail time to learn empathy. I regret that I had to reveal my military background to be taken seriously. She paused, scanning the faces before her. Ashley Chen in the front row, now student body president. Former victims who'd found their voices, former bullies who'd found their conscience. Tyler Knox's empty chair. He was still serving his sentence, but sent a letter of support that Grace read aloud. But I don't regret standing up, she continued. I don't regret showing that strength isn't about domination but about protection. That power isn't about pushing others down but lifting them up. That sometimes the smallest acts of resistance can topple the mightiest tyrannies. The applause was thunderous. But Grace was already thinking about tomorrow's lesson plan. They were starting Hamlet, a play about power, corruption, revenge, and the price of action versus inaction. Perfect for a class that had lived through its own drama. After the assembly, Sarah Mitchell approached. The sophomore had been one of Tyler's favorite targets before the incident. Now she walked with quiet confidence. One of the star students in the self-defense club, Miss Harper, I wanted to thank you, not just for what you did, but for what you taught us after. What's that, Sarah? That being strong doesn't mean becoming like them. Tyler thought strength meant hurting people. You showed us it means protecting people, even protecting Tyler from becoming worse than he was. Grace smiled. You've got a good head on your shoulders. Sarah, ever think about teaching? Actually, Sarah blushed. I'm thinking about the military, the Rangers. Specifically, if they're taking women now, they are. Grace confirmed. It won't be easy. Probably the hardest thing you'll ever do. But if you want it, really want it, you can do it. I'll write you a recommendation when the time comes. As the auditorium emptied, Grace found herself alone on the stage. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows, highlighting dust motes that danced like tiny warriors in the air. She thought about her journey, from battlefields in Afghanistan to battlefields in American high schools. Different fights, same core principle. Stand for those who can't stand for themselves. Her phone buzzed. A text from Tyler, sent through his lawyer. Finished my GED, starting college correspondence courses, want to be a counselor for at-risk youth. Thank you for believing people can change. Grace typed back, proud of you. Real strength is admitting weakness and working to improve. Keep going. Dr. Chen appeared in the doorway. Grace, there's someone here to see you. A woman in her 50s entered hesitantly. Grace recognized her from the courtroom. Tyler's mother, Elizabeth Knox. She divorced Richard after the trial. Started using her maiden name again. Miss Harper, Elizabeth began, voice shaking. I know I have no right to ask anything of you, but I wanted to apologize for what my son did, for what I let him become, for staying silent while my husband taught him that money meant immunity. Grace gestured to a chair. We all make choices. Mrs. Peterson, Elizabeth Peterson. I went back to my maiden name. She sat carefully, as if afraid to take up space. I watched that video 100 times. Watched my baby boy kick a teacher down the stairs. Watched him become his father. And I realized I'd failed him by never saying no. Never setting boundaries. Never showing him that actions have consequences. He's learning now, Grace said gently. His letters show real growth. Real remorse. Because of you. Because you stopped him before he became... Elizabeth's voice broke. Before he became Richard. Before he was too far gone to save. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Then, Elizabeth pulled out an envelope. I sold Midgevelry. Money I inherited from my grandmother. That Richard never knew about. It's $50,000. I want to donate it to the self-defense program. To help other kids learn what Tyler should have learned at home. Grace stared at the check. This is incredibly generous. It's necessary, Elizabeth said firmly. I can't undo the past, but maybe I can help shape a better future. One where strength means protection, not predation. The program expanded. New equipment, guest instructors, scholarships for students who couldn't afford the minimal fees. Grace insisted on calling it the Peterson Fund for Empowerment over Elizabeth's protests. Tyler, when he heard about it from his cell, broke down crying. Not from shame this time, but from something closer to redemption. A year after the stairwell incident, Westfield High was unrecognizable. Bullying incidents had dropped by 90%. Academic performance was up across the board. Apparently, students learned better when they weren't terrified. The self-defense program had spawned art therapy, peer mediation, and restorative justice initiatives. Grace still taught English, still graded papers late into the night, still believed in the power of words to change minds and hearts, but now her students knew she also believed in the power of standing up, speaking out, and fighting back when necessary. During Tyler's first speaking engagement, part of his community service at a neighboring high school, Grace sat in the back row. He was nervous, stumbling at first, but as he told his story, owned his actions, and warned others about the path he'd taken. His voice grew stronger. "I thought being strong meant making others weak," he told the assembled students. "I thought power meant fear. I kicked a teacher down the stairs because I believed she was beneath me. Because I'd been taught that money and size and gender made me superior." He paused, meeting eyes across the room. "I was wrong. That teacher, Miss Harper, she showed me what real strength looks like. It looks like protecting others. It looks like standing up to bullies even when they're bigger than you. It looks like mercy when you have every right to destroy someone." A student raised her hand. "Do you hate her for sending you to jail?" Tyler smiled sadly. "Hate her? She saved my life. If she hadn't stopped me that day, shown me consequences, I would have kept escalating. I would have hurt someone worse, maybe killed someone. Instead of speaking to you today, I might be serving 25 to life." He looked directly at Grace. "I'm grateful every day that she was strong enough to stop me, strong enough to show me a better way." After his talk, Tyler approached Grace hesitantly. He'd lost weight in jail, lost the swagger and sneer. In their place was something quieter, more thoughtful. "Miss Harper, thank you for coming. You did well." "Tyler, keep going." "I will. I've been accepted to community college. Want to study social work, maybe help kids before they end up like I was. That's a worthy goal." He shifted nervously. "I know I can never really make amends for what I did. To you, to Ashley, to all the others. But I want you to know, every day, I try to be better than I was. Every day. I remember that moment in the stairwell, and choose differently." Grace studied him carefully. The arrogant boy was gone. In his place stood a young man who'd learned the hardest lesson of all. That strength without compassion is just brutality. "Tyler," she said finally, "the best amends you can make is to live a good life. Help others. Raise your own children to be kind. Break the cycle." "I will," he promised. "I swear I will." As Grace drove home that evening, she thought about cycles, about her own journey from soldier to teacher, about Tyler's transformation from predator to protector, about a school that had gone from toxic to thriving. Change was possible. It just took one person willing to stand up and say, "No more." Her phone rang, another school district, asking if she could consult on their anti-bullying program. Another conference invitation, another request for her time, her expertise, her story. She declined politely. Her place was here, at Westfield High, with her students and their stories. Tomorrow they were starting The Kite Runner, a book about redemption, about the price of silence, about the possibility of being good again, perfect for a class, a school, a community that had learned those lessons the hard way. As she pulled into her driveway, Grace saw a package on her porch. Inside, a custom challenge coin, the kind military units made, but on one side, the Ranger scroll. On the other, an image of books and boxing gloves intertwined. The note read, "From your students at WHS. Rangers lead the way, in combat and in classrooms. Hua. Miss H." Grace smiled, pocketing the coin. Tomorrow there would be new challenges, new students to reach, new battles to fight with words and wisdom rather than fists. But tonight, she'd grade papers, plan lessons, and know that she'd found her place, not in the peaceful life she'd imagined, but in the necessary work of standing between the bullies and the bullied. Sometimes, the greatest warriors are the ones who teach others to fight for themselves. Sometimes the most important battles are won not with violence, but with the courage to say, "This ends now." And sometimes, just sometimes, everyone, even the villains, can learn to be better. The legend of the teacher who took down 3 bullies in 47 seconds would be told at Westfield High for generations. But the real legacy was in the hundreds of students who learned to stand tall, speak up, and protect each other. In the end, that's what education is really about, not just teaching subjects, but teaching strength. Grace Harper had come to Westfield High to teach English. She ended up teaching so much more. 5 years later, Grace Harper stood at the entrance of Westfield High. Watching the morning rush of students, the school had become a pilgrimage site of sorts. Educators from across the nation visited to study what they called the Westfield model. But Grace still saw it as simply doing what was right. "Miss Harper!" a voice called out. Grace turned to see Ashley Chen. Now, a senior at West Point, she'd come home for spring break. Her uniform crisp. Her bearing confident. "I wanted to thank you again for everything, Ashley. You earned your place at the academy through your own hard work. Maybe." Ashley smiled. "But you showed me I could stand tall. That being small didn't mean being weak." My drill sergeants were surprised when the tiny Asian girl from suburban America outlasted half the male recruits in combatives training. They were interrupted by another familiar face. Sarah Mitchell approached, wearing scrubs. She was doing her nursing residency at the local hospital. "Miss Harper, did you hear? Tyler's graduating next month. Social work degree. Magna cum laude." Grace nodded. She'd written him a recommendation letter for graduate school. The former bully was planning to specialize in youth intervention programs. His thesis, From Predator to Protector, Breaking Cycles of Violence, had won academic awards. "He's speaking at the ceremony," Sarah continued, asked if you'd introduce him. Before Grace could respond, a commotion erupted near the parking lot. 3 senior boys had cornered a freshman. Classic intimidation formation. But before Grace could move, something remarkable happened. "Back off, Stevens," a voice commanded. Another student, Grace, recognized him as Marcus Cole's younger brother. David stepped between the bullies and their target. "We don't do that here." "Says who?" Stevens sneered, but his voice wavered. "Says all of us," David replied, and suddenly he wasn't alone. A dozen students had materialized, forming a protective circle around the freshman. Not threatening, just present, just standing witness. Stevens looked around, saw phones already recording, saw the unified front, saw teachers approaching with purpose rather than avoidance. His shoulders slumped. "Whatever. Man, we were just talking." "No," David said firmly. "You were intimidating. There's a difference. Mike here is new. How about instead of cornering him, you show him where the guidance office is? He needs his schedule adjusted." It was a face-saving out, and Stevens took it. Within minutes, the would-be bullies were actually helping the freshmen navigate the school. Grace watched in amazement as the situation resolved without violence, without adult intervention, through pure peer pressure. "The positive kind, that's your real legacy," Ashley observed, "not the 47 seconds of combat. This, students protecting each other because it's who they are now, not because they have to." Dr. Chen emerged from the building, joining their impromptu reunion. "Grace, perfect timing. Tyler Knox is here for the graduation planning. He wanted to speak with you first." Grace found Tyler in her old classroom. She'd moved to a larger space to accommodate her expanded classes, but this room remained special. He stood at the window where he'd once terrorized classmates, his reflection showing a man who'd traveled far from the boy he'd been. "Miss Harper," he turned, extending his hand. The handshake was firm but respectful. "I wanted to run my speech by you. Make sure it honors what really happened here. Tyler, it's your story to tell." "No," he said firmly. "It's our story. Yours, Mine, the school's. I was the villain who got redeemed because the hero was strong enough to stop me without destroying me. That matters." He pulled out his notes. "I want to talk about toxic masculinity, about how my father taught me that strength meant domination, about how you showed me that real strength protects, about how jail saved my life because it forced me to face who I was becoming." Grace listened as he read excerpts. It was raw, honest, powerful. He didn't minimize his actions or paint himself as a victim. He owned every choice, every hurt he'd caused, while showing how redemption was possible through accountability and genuine change. "There's one more thing," Tyler said, reaching into his bag. He pulled out a worn letter. My first week in jail. I wrote apologies to everyone I'd hurt. This was yours. I never sent it because words seemed too small for what I'd done. But I've carried it ever since. A reminder. Grace took the letter but didn't open it. What matters is who you are now. Tyler, I know. But I need you to understand. That day in the stairwell? When you took us down without hatred? Without cruelty? Just necessity. That's when I realized everything I thought I knew about power was wrong. You could have hurt us badly. You didn't. You could have pressed for maximum charges. You didn't. You fought for me to do community service. To speak at schools. To have a chance at redemption. His voice cracked. My own father wrote me off. You didn't. The graduation ceremony 2 weeks later packed the auditorium beyond capacity. Grace stood at the podium, looking out at a sea of faces, students, parents, educators who'd come to witness the culmination of the Westfield transformation. 5 years ago, she began. A video went viral. 3 bullies attacked a teacher. The teacher defended herself. The internet called it justice. But what happened next? That's the real story. That's why you're all here. She introduced Tyler, watching him walk to the podium with measured steps. The audience was silent. Unsure how to receive the former villain of their story, Tyler gripped the podium, took a breath, and began. My name is Tyler Knox. 5 years ago, I kicked Miss Harper down 8 concrete steps because I thought power meant making others fall. Today, I stand here with a degree in social work, heading to graduate school, dedicated to preventing kids from becoming who I was. This isn't a redemption story. You can't undo harm. This is an accountability story. This is proof that when someone is strong enough to stop you at your worst, brave enough to believe you can become better, you owe it to them and to everyone you hurt to do the work. His speech was 20 minutes of brutal honesty. He named his victims. He detailed his crimes. He explained the psychology of bullying without excusing it. He thanked the judge who sentenced him, the correctional officers who treated him fairly, the therapists who challenged him, and most of all, the teacher who stopped him. Miss Harper taught me Shakespeare in jail through a correspondence course. He revealed, Hamlet says, I must be cruel only to be kind. She was kind in her cruelty, stopping me before I destroyed others and myself. Today, when I work with at-risk youth, I remember, sometimes the greatest kindness is refusing to let someone continue down a dark path. The standing ovation was hesitant at first, then thunderous, not for who Tyler had been, but for who he'd become, for the work he'd done, for the lives he now dedicated himself to saving. After the ceremony, Grace found herself surrounded by former students, colleagues, and visitors. But her eyes found Elizabeth Peterson in the crowd. Tyler's mother stood with tears streaming down her face as her son was surrounded by well-wishers and job offers from youth intervention programs. You saved him? Elizabeth whispered to Grace. No, Grace replied. He saved himself. I just showed him it was possible. As the crowd dispersed, Grace walked through the halls of Westfield High one more time. In 5 years, they'd gone from a school ruled by fear to a model of restorative justice. From a place where teachers were victims to one where they were respected leaders. From an institution that ignored bullying to one that had eliminated it through community courage. And in a small office at Westfield High, an English teacher, who happened to be an Army Ranger, was planning next year's curriculum, still believing in the power of words to change the world, backed up, when necessary, by the courage to act. The legend lived on, but more importantly, so did the lessons.